At 7:46 a.m. local time on August 13, 2025, the bridge of the USS Higgins settled into that tense quiet sailors recognize before something important happens. The sea was calm, a glassy pane broken by the destroyer's bow wave and the low, steady hum of machinery a deck below. On the radar repeater, a new contact bloomed to life, closing from the west. A voice cracked through the VHF guard frequency, Mandarin-accented English, with the brittle certainty of a script read 1,000 times. U.S. warship, you are in Chinese waters, leave immediately. Binoculars lifted along the starboard bridge wing. Scarborough Shoal, barely more than a necklace of reefs and rocks, sat beyond the horizon, invisible from sea level unless the light was just right. For Washington, these were international waters. For Beijing, this was sovereign territory. And the People's Liberation Army Navy intended to prove it the way it often does. Up close, loud on the radio, and unblinking on the beam. Minutes later, gray hulls slid into view, wakes knifing white scars into the blue. Chinese warships matched speed and settled in tight on the Higgins' starboard quarter. From their perspective, this was routine: monitor, warn, drive away. From the American perspective, this was a freedom of navigation operation, a legal transit designed to challenge claims the U.S. views as excessive and destabilizing. Either way you frame it, this morning had just become a high-stakes chess match where every helm order and every word on the radio could be interpreted as a concession, or a dare. It mattered that this transit happened here. Scarborough Shoal is, in physical terms, unimpressive. Coral, breakers, and a few rocks that rarely break the surface. But position is power, and Scarborough sits in a critical seam of the South China Sea, well within Manila's exclusive economic zone under international law. For the Philippines, it's a national symbol and a vital fishing ground. For China, which claims it as part of its sweeping 9-dash line, it's a forward outpost. Eyes and leverage over the maritime arteries that carry a staggering share of global trade. Control here is not about sand and coral, it's about sea control, surveillance, and the ability to shape the first hours of any future crisis. Since 2012, Chinese Coast Guard cutters and Navy ships have kept a near constant watch over these waters, building a rhythm of patrols and blocking maneuvers that fishermen from Zambales know too well. The message is always the same. These are our waters, and we will enforce our rules. That is the stage the USS Higgins sailed into, a theater where law, power, and messaging collide, and where every move carries weight far beyond the horizon. Within hours of the encounter, Beijing's narrative was out on state media. The American destroyer USS Higgins had, they said, entered China's territorial waters around Huangyan-dao, China's name for Scarborough Shoal, without permission. The PLA Southern Theater Command stated that Chinese naval units monitored, warned, and drove away the intruder to defend sovereignty and stability. Drove away is never an accidental choice of words. It announces strength at home and warns others abroad, especially regional navies, that challenges to China's claims will be met, publicly and decisively. In Washington, the reply arrived with equal firmness. A Navy spokesperson confirmed the Higgins' presence, but rejected any suggestion of unlawful action or forced withdrawal. The transit, they said, complied with international law, specifically the right of innocent passage and high seas freedoms reflected in the law of the sea. Freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, are not stunts. They're policy. They exist to puncture the legal aura around claims the U.S. deems excessive. Beijing often treats them as deliberate provocations. And so the pattern repeats. Two powerful navies, two carefully constructed versions of the same event, both insisting they never blinked. To understand the confidence on the American side, look at the ship at the center of the story. USS Higgins, DDG-76, is an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, the workhorse of U.S. surface forces. 155 meters of steel and sensors, just over 9,000 tons when fully loaded, built around a beating heart called Aegis. a combat system that fuses inputs from the SPY-1D phased array radar and other sensors, turning the surrounding air and sea into a constantly updated picture. Aegis is a conductor, and the ship is an orchestra. SM-2 surface-to-air missiles for area air defense, evolved Sea Sparrow missiles for close-in threats, Tomahawk cruise missiles for precision strikes ashore, and Harpoon anti-ship missiles for punching at surface targets beyond the horizon. Add 2 Phalanx CIWS mounts, Gatling guns that spit metal with a sewing machine buzz when seconds matter, and electronic warfare suites that listen, deceive, and, if necessary, jam. Higgins is not easy to rattle. Across the water, the planned Southern Theater Command drew on a familiar South China Sea playbook: shadow, warn, and escort foreign warships out of what China claims as its waters. The ships that appear in these encounters are often Type 052D destroyers or Type 054A frigates, modern hulls carrying HHQ-9 surface-to-air missiles, YJ-18 anti-ship missiles, and their own phased array radars. The tactic is consistent: close enough to show resolve and capture compelling photos, close enough to signal to domestic audiences that the Navy is on the scene and in control, but not so close and not so aggressive that a collision becomes inevitable. It's pressure without contact, friction just short of fire. Inside Higgins, the choreography was deliberate. The U.S. trains to make these passages firm but non-provocative. Steady speed, steady course, minimal radio chatter, no visible preparations for combat. The point is to reject excessive claims as a matter of routine navigation, not as a combat patrol. For the Chinese side, pressure is the point. High-speed approaches, repeated hails, tight parallel courses. Each side documents meticulously positions, bearings, closing speeds, the exact words in each radio call. Each side composes the public message long before the ships part company. Scarborough's geography magnifies risk. In confined waters, a few hundred meters feels like arm's length. Turn too early, and one side claims victory. They altered course. Turn too late, and your helmsman spends the rest of his life replaying the 30 seconds before steel met steel. The goal here isn't to fire the first shot. It's to force a mistake you can turn into policy and headlines. Beneath the maneuvers lies the dispute that makes them inevitable. Under the law of the sea, coastal states exercise sovereignty out to 12 nautical miles from their land. Farther out lies the exclusive economic zone, rights to resources, not to control navigation. A 2016 tribunal in The Hague ruled that China's 9-dash line has no legal basis and that Scarborough Shoal, unable to sustain human habitation, cannot generate its own EEZ. China rejects that ruling and enforces its position through presence. Coast Guard cutters, maritime militia boats, Navy hulls that appear when foreign ships arrive. The United States isn't a party to the treaty, but it treats the navigation rules as binding customary law. Its FONOPs are designed to keep the channels open by refusing to acknowledge what it sees as unlawful restrictions. For Beijing, the Higgins presence was a direct challenge to control established through a decade of patrols and barricades. For Washington, it was a lawful transit in international waters. The clash, as always, is less about who owns a ring of coral and more about who gets to write the rules of one of the busiest maritime regions on Earth. The most striking thing about August 13th is how much remains purposefully uncertain. China's statement says the Higgins was driven away after repeated warnings. No public release of footage, no track plots, no radar tapes, at least not yet. On the US side, officials confirmed the presence and rejected any suggestion that Chinese actions forced a change of course. The transit, they said, was conducted as planned. Again, no public imagery, no shared logs. In truth, both sides likely recorded everything. In practice, those records surface only when they serve a larger message. That's why the world so often ends up with two versions of the same encounter, both crafted to support broader political aims. What we don't know matters. We don't know how close the Chinese ships actually came, how many were involved, or whether aircraft circled just beyond the clouds. We don't know if a Coast Guard cutter nosed in as the Navy warships held off. We don't know whether a single radio call, clipped and cold, escalated the tone. Without those details, outsiders can't judge how close this came to a dangerous turn. What is clear is that the script held. There were no collisions, no weapons released, only two governments telling two stories about one morning, and both insisting their version proves a larger point. Context makes this encounter heavier. The weeks leading up to it saw a hum of activity across the Indo-Pacific. Chinese naval and Coast Guard patrols pressed their presence not just at Scarborough, but throughout the Spratly and Paracel Islands. PLA Air Force sorties traced lines that nibbled at the air defense identification zones of Taiwan and the Philippines. Early August brought a large-scale Chinese live-fire drill in the South China Sea. Missiles, amphibious landings, the works, widely read as a signal to neighbors and to Washington. Within days, the Philippines and India staged their first joint naval exercises in the same waters, a reminder that opposition to Beijing's claims is growing more coordinated. Against that backdrop, one American destroyer through one contested shoal is never an isolated act. It's a brushstroke in a larger picture. For Washington, the Higgins movement fit a long pattern: steady presence to reassure allies and partners, to keep maritime spaces from being fenced by precedent. For Beijing, the same transit looked like an intrusion at a place just 300 kilometers from Luzon, a place China considers strategically vital to policing its claims and constraining a U.S.-Philippine alliance it sees as tightening. Timing sharpened the edges. Manila had recently refreshed its security ties with Washington, opening more Philippine bases to U.S. access. Scarborough had seen a spike in confrontations, water cannons, aggressive blocking moves, videos shared and debated. In that climate, a single destroyer's course line can turn into a litmus test. Who yields room? Who keeps steady? Whose footage finds its way to the nightly news? By the time Higgins cleared the waters around the shoal, no shots had been fired. No hulls bore fresh scars from a misjudged wake. On the surface, it was just another day in a dispute that has long threatened to become something worse. But the messages embedded in the choreography were not subtle. China's insistence that it drove away a U.S. warship underscores an image of dominance in its near seas, a message to domestic audiences that sovereignty is actively defended and to foreign navies that challenges will meet resistance. America's insistence that there was no deviation, no forced retreat, is equally vital. Admitting a turn under pressure would hand Beijing a propaganda victory and erode the very logic of FONOPs, that the sea lanes remain open because great powers refuse by habit and by law to accept new fences. Encounters like this are a running stress test on the region. How close can rival powers come without crossing a line that can't be uncrossed? How much pressure can crews apply before a helmsman somewhere makes the wrong call by 3 degrees and 3 seconds? The answer, for now, is very close indeed. On the bridge of the Higgins, amid the coffee cups and the pencil-marked charts, the routine continued by design. CIC fed the bridge a clean picture. The SPY-1D arrays kept their silent geometry against the sky. Watchstanders logged every call and bearing. The captain's orders were calm and exact. There is comfort in routine when the stakes are high. Maintain course, maintain speed, record everything. Across the water, Chinese sailors were doing the same. Their radar scopes spun, their camera lenses tracked the American deck. Their signalmen ticked each exchange into the day's log. Their job wasn't to force a collision, it was to force a narrative, an image of foreign steel leaving waters China claims as its own. If the American destroyer made a courtesy jog to avoid a fisherman, if it adjusted course a few degrees to keep Coregs tidy, those degrees could be translated into a headline. This is the gray space where 21st century naval competition lives. Inches of steel and miles of meaning. It's easy to reduce these encounters to a scoreboard. Who moved first, who said what, who published the video. But the deeper contest is over what rules will govern the seas between the first and second island chains, and who gets to interpret those rules in practice. Freedom of navigation doesn't live in a courtroom. It lives in ships that choose to sail. in captains who choose not to deviate, in governments that choose to keep doing both even when the radio gets unfriendly. By mid-morning, the sunlight over Scarborough brightened to hard white. The sea remained deceptively gentle. The Chinese hulls held their positions, then fell away in slow arcs as the Higgins track line carried her onward. Maybe there were more hails. There usually are. Maybe there were tense moments. There often are. But the fact that no one released video tells its own story. Both sides got what they came for. Beijing signaled resolve. Washington signaled habit. The Philippines watched closely. So did every navy with a stake in the region's shipping lanes and a map covered in red lines. Which leaves the question that always hangs in the air after these encounters. Was this a genuine driven-away moment, or a freedom of navigation transit that played out exactly as planned, with both sides spinning the aftermath to match their strategic narratives? Without the tapes, the answer depends on which flag you salute. With them, the answer would still be read through politics as much as pixels. What's not ambiguous is the trend line. Scarborough Shoal is one flashpoint among many. Reefs built up into artificial islands, runways where lagoons used to be, patrol routes habituated into norms. The next close pass could involve more ships, faster approaches, and tighter margins. The nearer the hulls, the larger the role for luck, and luck is a terrible policy. That is why these operations must be disciplined to the point of boredom, and why they remain, nonetheless, electric to watch. So now it's your turn. Do encounters like this make open conflict more likely by stacking friction upon friction until something breaks? Or are they the necessary cost of keeping strategic waters open, asserting rights so that rights do not erode? Did the Higgins get driven away? Or did it draw a straight legal line through a contested narrative? Drop your take in the comments. I read them, and this audience is sharp. Out here, in the world's most contested waters, it's not about who blinks first. It's about who's still on station, steady on course, when the other guy does. Fair winds and following seas. See you in the next one. At 7:46 a.m. on Aug 13, 2025, USS Higgins, DDG-76, transited near Scarborough Shoal on a freedom of navigation run. Chinese warships closed in, radioed "leave immediately," and later claimed they drove away the destroyer. The US says the passage was lawful and uninterrupted. This video breaks down the standoff, why Scarborough sits inside the Philippines EEZ, what UNCLOS and the 2016 ruling mean, and how an Aegis destroyer manages close shadowing without escalation. Was Higgins forced out, or was it a textbook FONOP? Watch the timeline, tactics, and legal stakes, and decide.